Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by Kristoff.
Hello. So good to be here. I was going to say see you. Can't see you. But yes, I always make that mistake. I'm so glad you're here with us.
And that's fine. That's perfectly human.
Thank you.
So today we're stepping into a chapter of World War I that doesn't usually headline the textbooks, but it absolutely should. We're diving into the Sinai and Palestine campaign. A vast, dramatic, and often overlooked front of the war that spanned from 1915 to 1918 and unfolded across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. Now, if you're picturing the trenches of France, mud, wire, and no man's land, think again. This campaign played out in a radically different setting. The deserts of the Sinai Peninsula, the coastal plains of Gaza, the hills around Jerusalem, and eventually the broad valleys near Megiddo, and on into what is now Lebanon and Syria. It involved camels, cavalry charges, and the relentless march of columns across dry, windswept expanses. But behind all that movement, just like in Mesopotamia, there was a powerful and often invisible partner, the naval and maritime logistical system, which made it all possible. This was a campaign that began with a defensive stance, protecting the Suez Canal, Britain's vital artery to its empire in India and beyond, and ended with a stunning offensive, toppling the Ottoman Empire's grip over the Holy Land and reshaping the Middle East in ways we still live with today. So, why does this campaign matter? And why are we talking about it here? That's a great question.
That is a great question. I was struggling to answer, but continue. I'm sure your answer is much better.
On the surface, this campaign might seem like a story of land warfare, cavalry, infantry, and trenches in the sand. But peel back the layers, and you'll find it was deeply dependent on naval power, inland logistics, and a kind of hybrid warfare where control of ports, supply lines, and even pipelines were just as important as winning battles. Just like in Mesopotamia, the British weren't just fighting the Ottomans. They were fighting geography itself. They built railways across the desert. They laid hundreds of miles of water pipelines to sustain advancing troops.
Wow.
And they moved reinforcements, weapons, and horses via ship to ports like Suez and eventually Haifa. Naval vessels patrolled the coast, protected maritime routes, and delivered vital cargo to keep the desert war machine running. And while we often hear about great battles like Gallipoli or the Western Front in France, this campaign, led in its later stages by General...
I was going to say Abishai?
Edmund Allenby.
Allenby. All right, sorry. Thanks. Allenby.
We saw some of the war's boldest maneuvers. We'll cover events like the stunning charge at Beersheba, where Australian light horse units stormed Ottoman trenches in what's often considered the last great cavalry charge in military history. We'll trace the methodical push through Gaza and into Palestine, culminating in the symbolic and powerful entry into Jerusalem. And finally, the collapse of Ottoman resistance at Megiddo and Damascus. But we're not just telling a story of military conquest. we're also looking into the long shadow it cast. Because when this campaign ended, the map of the Middle East was permanently redrawn. The Ottoman Empire was dismantled. British and French mandates took root. And the seeds of many 20th century conflicts were sown right here in these deserts. So, over the episode, we're going to walk you through this campaign step by step, from the early days of Ottoman raids on the Suez Canal through the grueling advances across Sinai to the sophisticated and highly coordinated offenses of 1917 and 18. And of course, we'll be highlighting the often forgotten naval elements, the gunboats, the coastal patrols, the port operations, and the massive maritime supply networks that made an inland desert war possible. Because while this might not have been a naval campaign in the traditional sense, it was a campaign that absolutely could not have happened without the sea. So, fill your canteen, check your compass, and saddle up. We're heading to the sand and the sun of the First World War's Southern Front. This is the story of the Sinai and Palestine campaign. And trust me, it's not just a story of horses and rifles. It's a story of strategy, survival, and how the sea kept the desert war alive. Are you ready to get underway?
Oh, yeah. I was promised camels, so I'm very excited.
All right, so let's step back to the early days of the First World War. It's 1915. The Ottoman Empire has recently joined the war on the side of the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. And with that alliance comes a major strategic threat to British interests in the Middle East, especially to one particular lifeline, the Suez Canal. Now, if you're not already familiar with its importance, let me paint a picture for you. The Suez Canal, stretching from Port Said to the Mediterranean Sea to Suez on the Red Sea, was and still is one of the most critical maritime arteries in the world.
Oh, yeah.
For the British Empire, it was absolutely vital. The canal provided the fastest route from Britain to its colonies in India, Australia, and the Far East. Without naval and commercial traffic, would have to detour all the way around the southern tip of Africa, adding weeks to any journey. So when the Ottomans threatened the canal, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat to the empire's ability to project power across the globe. And they didn't just threaten it in theory, they attacked it. In late January 1915, an Ottoman force of around 20,000 troops, including Syrian, Palestinian, and Anatolian units, set out across the Sinai Peninsula, with the goal of capturing or at least sabotaging the canal. Their aim was ambitious. If they could cut off British access to the canal, they could sever the empire's connection to India and force a major shift in the war's global logistics.
That would be huge.
Now, crossing the Sinai wasn't exactly a cakewalk. It was, and still is, a brutal, arid landscape. We're talking burning hot days, freezing cold nights, blinding sandstorms, and most importantly, a near total lack of fresh water. The Ottomans brought camels, supplies, and even pontoon bridges.
Wow.
Believing they could launch a surprise attack and cross the canal quickly before the British could respond. But the British had begun preparing. They had begun fortifying the canal zone in late 1914, building outposts, laying barbed wire, and stationing Indian troops, Gurkhas, and British Marines all along the western bank. Crucially, they had naval patrols in the canal itself, armed tugboats, river gunboats, and even coastal artillery floating on barges. The canal was narrow, shallow in parts, and not easy to cross without coming under fire from both land and water. So, when the Ottoman force launched its attack in the early morning hours of February 3rd, 1915, they were met with fierce resistance. The fighting was sharp and chaotic. Ottoman troops managed to get close enough to the canal to assemble pontoon bridges. But the British opened fire with rifles, machine guns, and light artillery. Indian troops held the line on the west bank. Gunboats maneuvered through the canal, providing suppressive fire. The Ottoman pontoons were smashed before the main force could cross. Some Ottoman units did manage to get across, but there were brief and intense firefights along the western bank. But by the end of the day, the assault had failed. The Ottomans withdrew under fire, leaving behind over 1,500 casualties and dozens of prisoners. The canal was safe for now. That skirmish is often called the first raid on the Suez Canal, and has set the tone for the next phase of the war in the region. The British knew that simply holding the west bank of the canal wasn't going to be enough. If they wanted to truly secure the canal from future attacks, they needed to go on the offensive, and that meant advancing into the Sinai Desert. This was no easy task. At the time, the Sinai was essentially empty. No roads, no railways, no water stations. Moving an army through it would be like walking into a frying pan without a drop of water in sight.
Yeesh.
Oh,
no, that sounds awful.
But British engineers, logisticians, and commanders came up with a solution that combined old world resilience with modern logistics. They began building a military railway, stretching from the canal zone eastward towards Palestine. Along the railway, they laid a water pipeline.
Brilliant.
Using steel pipes and pumping stations to deliver potable water for both men and animals. This was a feat of engineering in its own right. The British Army essentially built a mobile, supply-driven highway across the desert. By mid-1916, British and Anzac troops were pushing deeper into the Sinai, using the railway and pipeline to sustain their advance. And by July, they had established defensive positions near the small oasis town of Romani, about 25 miles east of the canal. And sure enough, the Ottomans tried to strike one more time. In early August 1916, Ottoman forces under...
Ottoman forces. Pasha.
Kress von Christenstein.
What? That is not an Ottoman name that I would have ever guessed.
It's because he was a capable German officer serving with the Turks.
I see. Okay. Well, that makes sense.
They launched the Battle of Romani. This was their last real attempt to threaten the canal. But this time, the British were ready with numbers, artillery, and crucially, mobility.
Oh, yeah.
The Australian light horse played a key role in this battle, using their speed and maneuverability to outflank the Ottoman advance. Supported by British infantry and naval logistics bringing up ammunition and supplies via the new rail line. The Anzac forces repelled the Ottoman attack and forced them into a long, disorganized retreat across the desert. Romani wasn't just a tactical victory, it marked a turning point. From this moment on, the British were no longer on the defensive in the Middle East. The Ottomans would not mount another serious assault on the canal. The railway kept pushing east, enabling British and Dominion forces to follow the retreating enemy all the way across the Sinai and into southern Palestine. And once again, behind all of this desert maneuvering, we see the quiet, steady work of maritime and naval logistics. The supplies didn't come by camel alone. They came by ship, then by train, and sometimes even by horse-drawn trams, running on temporary tracks built across the sand.
Impressive.
Coastal patrols protected troop transports. Warships off the Sinai shore monitored Ottoman movements. Engineers used equipment offloaded from British vessels to build pump stations and command posts in places that hadn't even seen a map, let alone a railway, in centuries. So, to recap, the Suez Canal was never captured. The Ottomans tried twice, but between well-positioned defensive lines, the use of local garrisons, and the clever adaptation of naval support, both on the water and behind the lines, the British held the empire's artery open. More importantly, the British didn't just defend it. They launched a new phase of the war from that very point. What started as a defensive scramble to protect a waterway evolved into a desert campaign that would take them through Gaza, into Jerusalem, and eventually to the gates of Damascus.
Dang. That is really fascinating. I see a lot of parallels between this and the episode that we talked about, the British in modern-day Iraq, where they used a lot of river infrastructure. And early in that episode, they had a lot of overconfidence, and they were smacked back by the Ottomans, but then they took their time and understood the importance of logistics and maritime support, just like we're seeing here. I think the steady construction of railway and water line to assist them going in the direction of the offensive is something that I have not heard of in that part of the world until that point. Like, if you think about, like, even biblically, that was the area that Moses led the Israelites through. That was the wilderness, and there was nothing there. Or if you fast forward and talk about the Arab conquest of North Africa, they came through there, and the reason they were so capable and effective is because they used camel infantry. They were able to cross the desert in ways that other people could not, because there weren't roads or access to water, or horses would just collapse. But because the British had all this infrastructure and all this support, they were able to deploy at will. And that just makes a huge difference. And I'm imagining if Moses had this railway, or the caliphate that was pushing into North Africa had this railway, what a difference that would have been. Or the opposite side, if the garrisons of Egypt, of Alexandria, had this ability to support themselves or anticipate, oh yeah, they're coming from the desert, no problem. What a difference. Like, history changes with all these different decisions and abilities, and I think this is another example. We see our modern day being shaped by these military and strategic decisions, and it's incredible.
Yeah. By late 1916, after the victory at Romani and the successful drive across the Sinai Desert, the British Empire's forces had done something remarkable. They had pushed across one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. As you said, laying railway and water pipelines behind them as they went. But their job wasn't finished. Ahead lay southern Palestine, and with it some of the most challenging and strategically significant battles of the entire Middle East theater. Cities like Gaza, Beersheba, and Jerusalem would soon become household names, not just for their ancient heritage, but for the brutal fighting that would decide control of the region. Let's begin with Gaza. By early 1917, British forces, now under the reorganized Egyptian Expeditionary Force, or EEF, were preparing to capture Gaza, a key Ottoman stronghold on the Mediterranean coast, sat along the main road and railway line leading to Jerusalem and Damascus. Taking Gaza would open the way into central Palestine. The first attempt came in March of 1917. British and Anzac forces launched what's now known as the First Battle of Gaza. They approached the city from the south and east, managing to penetrate the Ottoman defenses and even capturing key outposts.
Wow.
But then came a fatal breakdown in communication. Believing that Ottoman reinforcements were approaching, the British command ordered a withdrawal, even though the position was all but taken. The result? A retreat from the edge of victory. The Ottomans reoccupied their trenches, fortified the city, and prepared for round two.
As soon as you said first battle, I'm like, uh-oh.
That second round came just a few weeks later, in April 1917. This time, British and Dominion forces were better prepared, at least on paper.
Right.
The Second Battle of Gaza involved tanks, heavy artillery, and even the use of poison gas. It marked one of the few times gas was used in the Middle East theater. But despite all that firepower, the results were even worse than before. The Ottomans, now entrenched in layers of fortifications, repelled the assault with heavy losses on both sides. British casualties were over 6,000.
Golly.
And the attack failed to break the stalemate. At this point, morale dipped. Political pressure mounted back in London. Something had to change. And change did come in the form of General
Allenby?
Edmund Allenby.
Boom.
Allenby arrived in June of 1917, replacing General...
Roger McGovern.
Sir Archibald Murray.
Can't get them all right.
As commander of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force. Allenby was a tall, imposing man, known for his discipline, meticulous planning, and aggressive style. He immediately got to work reorganizing the campaign, refining the command structure, reinforcing units, and most importantly, rethinking the strategy. Rather than continue with head-on assaults, Allenby planned to deceive, outflank, and surprise the Ottomans. And the centerpiece of that new strategy? The desert town of Beersheba, sitting to the east of Gaza, had long been seen as too far inland, too arid, and too defensible to attack directly. The Ottomans expected Allenby to strike Gaza again. But in October 1917, Allenby launched a surprise attack on Beersheba, a move that would become legendary. On October 31st, 1917, British infantry began bombarding Ottoman positions outside Beersheba, supported by artillery and aircraft. But the true climax came late in the day, when the Australian light horse mounted troops, who often fought dismounted, were ordered to charge directly into the town.
Wow.
This became known as the Charge at Beersheba, one of the last great cavalry charges in military history. About 800 Australian troopers, armed only with rifles and bayonets, galloped across open desert at full speed directly into the Ottoman trenches.
Yikes.
The defenders, exhausted and caught off guard, fired volleys of rifle and machine gun fire, but the horses closed the distance too quickly. In under an hour, the Australians had overrun the defenses and captured Beersheba.
That's incredible.
The charge was a stunning success, both tactically and symbolically. The fall of Beersheba unhinged the entire Ottoman line. With the flank broken, Allenby launched a coordinated attack on Gaza just days later. The Ottomans, stretched thin and now threatened from multiple directions, abandoned the city on November 7th. At last, after 2 bloody failures, Gaza was in British hands. Now, with the southern defenses broken and British logistics running smoothly through captured ports and extended railways, Allenby pushed north towards the ultimate prize, Jerusalem. This wasn't just a strategic city. It was symbolic, sacred to 3 major religions, and politically explosive. Capturing it required precision and diplomacy in equal measure. Allenby's forces reached Jerusalem's outskirts in early December 1917. Fighting around the hills and ridgelines was intense. Narrow, winding terrain made artillery difficult and movement slow. The Ottomans defended stubbornly, but couldn't hold. On December 9th, 1917, after weeks of hard fighting, Ottoman forces withdrew from the city. And here's where Allenby did something remarkable. Instead of riding into Jerusalem on horseback or entering in full military pomp, he dismounted and walked through the Haifa Gate.
Really?
As a sign of respect for the city's religious significance.
Nice.
It was a symbolic gesture, but a powerful one. Photographs of Allenby walking humbly through the gate were widely published and had a tremendous propaganda effect throughout the Allied world. By the end of 1917, Jerusalem was under British control. The Ottomans had suffered a serious blow, and the British Empire now held one of the most revered cities on earth. Let's take a moment to reflect, not just on the victories, but on what made them possible. None of this, the charge at Beersheba, the breakthrough at Gaza, the capture of Jerusalem, would have worked without logistics. And once again, the Navy played a critical role.
Oh, yeah.
Naval transport ships offloaded tons of equipment and provisions at Mediterranean ports, like Port Said, Jaffa, and eventually Haifa. Coastal patrols protected these vital supply lines. Engineers, many of them transported by sea, built the water pipelines to support cavalry and infantry in the desert. Naval medical personnel helped treat the wounded from Beersheba and Gaza, evacuated by rail to coastal hospitals, and then by sea to Egypt. This campaign, spanning dry lands and holy cities, was powered by the sea. Allenby may have led from the front, but the momentum behind his army was carried on waves and rails. And it wasn't over yet. The fall of Jerusalem marked a turning point, but the final phase of the campaign would come in 1918, with sweeping maneuvers through northern Palestine and into Syria, culminating in the decisive battle of Megiddo.
Oh, man.
But we'll get into that here in a minute.
I think every time you say Megiddo, I just think about that's supposedly the legendary location of Armageddon, right? And so I'm sure the folks fighting there knew that. And I wonder whenever there's a battle there if they anticipate, oh, this is it, this is the end, just because it's so ingrained in both cultures. I think it's interesting because strategically, I don't see necessarily what getting Gaza or Jerusalem, how that would necessarily benefit the British. I mean, they're on the offensive, they're rolling, they might as well, I guess. But originally, we're defending the Suez Canal, and you're so far from the Suez Canal at this point. It seems a little arbitrary, but at the same time, it's war. Like, defeat the enemy where they are, and that's where the enemy is. And they're able to capture it. And it's so close to the Mediterranean that they could easily get supported by their navy. So why not? And the more that you hold, the less the enemy has. And so, yeah, I guess strategically I'm conflicted why they would have to do that, but it is nice that the army's able to showcase victory after victory because popular support, especially in a liberal democracy, or I guess a monarchy at this point, but Magna Carta and all that, not necessarily absolute monarchy. Yeah, that's important. It's important that they get these victories. And like you said, what a historic and geopolitically important prize that they've acquired through this. I have to imagine the Ottomans, as entrenched as they were in all these different places, just getting pushed back and back and back and getting defeat after defeat had to sting a lot, especially given how successful they were at repelling at Gallipoli and at least initially in the Persian campaign. But man, they just keep losing, and it's significant.
When General Edmund Allenby captured Jerusalem in December 1917, it was a watershed moment, not just for the campaign, but for global perceptions of the war. The press heralded it as the Christian West reclaiming the holy city from the Muslim Ottoman Empire.
Boy, yeah, okay.
But despite all the fanfare, Allenby knew the war was far from over. The Ottomans still held vast territory in northern Palestine and southern Syria, including important cities of Nablus, Haifa, and Damascus. The German-led Ottoman 7th and 8th armies were regrouping, and behind them loomed the rest of the Ottoman heartland. If the Allies wanted a lasting peace in the region, they had to deal a decisive blow. But then, something happened that nearly halted the momentum. In early 1918, just as Allenby was preparing to strike north, the German spring offensive on the Western Front began in earnest.
That's right.
With the threat of a breakthrough in France, British High Command diverted men, horses, and artillery from the Middle East to Europe. Allenby lost several divisions, forces he'd counted on for his next advance. This could have stopped the campaign cold. But Allenby, ever the strategist, adapted. Rather than rush into a new offensive with a weakened army, he paused. He spent the summer of 1918 rebuilding, focusing on local recruitment, re-equipping his forces, and refining a brilliant plan that would culminate in one of the most effective offensives of the entire war. The Battle of Megiddo. Now, Megiddo isn't just a battlefield. It's a place steeped in biblical symbolism, as you were saying. It's known as the prophesied site of Armageddon. It lies in a wide, fertile valley with strategic access to the north of Palestine. Controlling Megiddo meant controlling the gateway to Syria. Allenby's plan, crafted over months, was a masterstroke of deception and coordination. Here's how it worked. First, he faked an offensive. Throughout the late summer, British and Anzac troops staged visible preparations for an attack on the Jordan Valley, east of the Jordan River, drawing Ottoman forces in that direction. They built dummy camps, lit nighttime fires, and even broadcast fake radio chatter to sell the illusion. Meanwhile, his real force, consisting of British, Indian, Australian, New Zealand, and French troops, was concentrated secretly west of Mount Caramel, near the coast. And right behind them, a rebuilt logistical machine, supplied by naval ports at Jaffa and Caesarea. These ports, secured by earlier advances, were now critical in offloading artillery, ammunition, rations, and medical supplies. Naval vessels patrolled the coast, guarded sea lanes, and ensured a constant flow of reinforcements. Then, on September 19th, 1918, Allenby struck. The Battle of Megiddo began with a massive artillery barrage, the largest yet in the Middle East theater. It probably felt like being on the end of Armageddon. Followed by a coordinated infantry assault along the Mediterranean coastal plain. The terrain here was relatively flat and open, ideal for a rapid breakthrough. Within hours, the Ottoman Eighth Army, caught completely off guard, was collapsing. The line cracked wide open, and Allenby didn't wait. He sent in the Desert Mounted Corps, led by Australian General
Angus McTavish.
That would probably be more Scottish.
Yeah, I was thinking of AC/DC, and then I got derailed. Sorry, you're right.
Harry Cheval.
Ooh, yeah, that's Australian.
He was sent in to exploit the breach. Cavalry regiments, supported by armored cars and backed by aerial reconnaissance, galloped deep into Ottoman territory, cutting off retreat routes, destroying communication lines, and seizing supply depots. What followed was a pursuit that resembled blitzkrieg, long before the term even existed. Ottoman forces, now in full retreat, were hounded across the central highlands of Palestine. At Nablus, at Jenin, British and Indian troops intercepted massive columns of retreating soldiers, capturing tens of thousands. Supply lines collapsed. Morale broke. Whole Ottoman armies simply vanished from the battlefield. Just days after, Allenby pushed his cavalry towards the coast once again, this time targeting the crucial port of Haifa. Now, let's pause here, because Haifa represents something uniquely important to our theme: the integration of land warfare and naval logistics. Up to this point, much of the campaign had relied on ports like Port Said and Haifa, or Jaffa, which were relatively far from the front. But with Haifa, the British would gain a deep water port right behind the advancing front line. A rare and vital advantage. Naval vessels had already begun clearing mines from the harbor as British troops advanced. Indian cavalry units, supported by armored cars and aerial recon, swept into the city. On September 23rd, 1918. The fall of Haifa gave the British an operational port through which to quickly reinforce their northern advance. Within days, naval supply chains were reactivated and feeding the front lines. Meanwhile, the Desert Mounted Corps continued north at an astonishing pace. On October 1st, 1918, British-led forces entered Damascus. Yeah, that Damascus. The city fell with barely a fight, thanks to collapsing Ottoman discipline and the support of Arab forces under...
God, Arab forces. I'm going to say Abnal. No, hold on. I lost it. I don't know.
T.E. Lawrence. Lawrence of Arabia?
What? That's right. This is it. Oh. Yeah, that's quite a book and movie. All of you listening now, if you have not seen it or read it, you should go do that. A legend in his own time.
His role was political and symbolic, but he played a key part in coordinating tribal uprisings that made Ottoman retreat even more chaotic. 2 weeks later, on October 25th, the British cavalry seized Aleppo. And by that point, the Ottoman Empire was in no condition to fight. Just 5 days after that, the Armistice of Mudros was signed aboard a British warship in the Aegean Sea. It took effect on October 31st, 1918, officially ending Ottoman participation in the war. Now, let's look at the scope of what just happened. In just 6 weeks, Allenby's forces had advanced over 350 miles, captured more than 75,000 prisoners, and essentially destroyed the Ottoman military presence in Levant. It was one of the most rapid and decisive military campaigns in modern military history. And as we've seen throughout this entire episode, none of it would have worked without naval support. Let's recap a few key naval contributions that made the final offensive possible. Coastal supply ports, like Jaffa and Haifa, allowed Allenby to maintain a fast-moving offensive without losing contact with his rear. Troop transports delivered reinforcements and material directly to key forward positions, saving time and energy. Naval patrols along the Mediterranean and Red Sea secured supply routes from German and Ottoman raiders. Medical evacuation via hospital ships allowed for wounded troops to be stabilized and transported safely to Egypt or back to Britain. And beyond the logistics, the strategic flexibility provided by sea power gave Allenby options. He could threaten Ottoman flanks, redeploy faster, and pivot between objectives with speed that was impossible for his opponents. So, in many ways, the final phase of the Sinai and Palestine campaign was not just a victory for land forces, but a textbook case of maritime integration. A demonstration of what happens when naval planning supports a bold land campaign from start to finish. But in the end, fighting didn't mean the end of consequence. After the armistice, British and French forces divided Ottoman territories between them.
Mm-hmm.
Under the Sykes-Picot Agreement, Britain took control of Palestine, Transjordan, and Iraq. France took Lebanon and Syria. These post-war mandates would lead to decades of political upheaval, territorial disputes, and the eventual rise of nationalist movements across the Arab world. So yes, Allenby's campaign brought a kind of victory, but it also laid the groundwork for a new chapter of colonialism and all the tension that came with it.
Yeah, just thinking about how fast of a... As you were reading the dates of all these battles and the progress of Allenby, I'm like, oh man, he got that right before the armistice. That's incredible. But what I wasn't realizing, it was the other way around. Him capturing all that stuff accelerated the armistice. He knocked the Ottomans effectively out of the war. And with the Ottomans out, it became more and more dire for the remaining Central Powers. And they were already in upheaval anyway. And so
Mm-hmm.
this southern portion of the campaign was absolutely vital to ending the war, I guess, more quickly. And then, like you just said, the ramifications of the mandates, as far as how the Middle East was carved up between the French and the English or the British. Yeah, when like Jordan became a country at this point, and I think Israel wasn't officially a country, but the mandate planted the seeds. Like Israel was supposed to become a country here, but then was actually deployed after World War II. Like it's like, hey, this is the World War I mandate that we were supposed to do anyway. Let's go ahead and do that. And so that was planted. The borders between Iran and Iraq and Syria, all that stuff gets determined here. And that has, like you said, caused a ton of conflict. And it's interesting to see how much stuff and how the impact with ripples that go out for decades to centuries can happen just because of the events of just a few years, in this conflict. And it's astonishing. And I think it is important to understand the root of all that. Like, how did we get here? Oh, it was the Black Hand assassinating Franz Ferdinand. And that's why we have the modern Middle East. And it's crazy.
And here we are at the close of the Sinai and Palestine campaign. From the desert sands of Sinai, through the trenches outside Gaza, over the rocky heights surrounding Jerusalem, and into the cities of Damascus and Aleppo, we've followed a campaign that spanned more than 1,200 miles, took nearly 4 years, and ultimately helped dismantle one of the world's oldest empires. But before we end, let's take a step back. Not to recount the movements of armies or the victories on the battlefield, but to reflect on what this campaign meant. Not just for the men who fought it, but for naval history, for military strategy, and the shape of the modern Middle East. Let's start with the naval legacy. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This was a land campaign, right? Mounted troops, desert marches, infantry in trenches. What does the Navy have to do with any of this? But here's the thing. Every successful land campaign in this theater was underpinned by maritime power. And nowhere was that more evident than in Sinai and Palestine. First, consider supply and logistics. In a region with almost no usable roads, no native railways connecting major cities, and barely any fresh water infrastructure, moving troops inland was almost impossible without outside support. That support came via ships, merchant steamers, hospital transports, coastal freighters, and even small naval patrol boats. Allied ports like Alexandria, Port Said, and later Haifa and Jaffa served as lifelines. They offloaded everything from ammunition and artillery to canned food, uniforms, and medical kits. Naval convoys protected these supply lines from U-boat attacks and Ottoman commerce raiders. Without secure sea lanes and safe harbors, there could have been no push beyond the Suez Canal. Second, the campaign's strategic flexibility was deeply rooted in maritime advantage. Because the British controlled the Mediterranean coastline, they could shift troops, redirect supplies, and threaten Ottoman flanks in a way the Ottomans could never match. When Allenby marched northward in 1918, ports like Haifa and Acre became immediate operational hubs, allowing cavalry and infantry to press forward without outrunning their logistics. It's also important to consider the integration of naval and land-based medical support. Hospital ships played a critical role in evacuating the wounded, especially during the Gaza and Megiddo campaigns. These vessels acted as floating triage centers, transporting injured soldiers back to Cairo, Malta, and Britain, where they could receive advanced treatment. Without this maritime medical infrastructure, survival rates would have plummeted. And then there's the symbolic power of naval presence. When the armistice of Mudros was signed on October 30th, 1918, it was aboard the British battleship HMS Agamemnon, a nod to the power dynamics at play. The war had begun with the defense of a canal and ended with the signing of peace aboard a warship. That arc says everything about the relationship between maritime dominance and imperial security in the region. So if we're taking lessons from the Sinai and Palestine front, one of them is this. Control of the sea doesn't just win battles at sea. It determines who can fight on land and for how long. Now let's talk legacy, beyond the tactics, beyond the ports. The Sinai and Palestine campaign didn't just defeat the Ottoman military. It dismantled the Ottoman Empire. By the war's end, the Middle East was up for grabs. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret deal between Britain and France, divided Ottoman lands into spheres of influence. Britain took Palestine and Iraq. France took Lebanon and Syria. Borders were drawn with little regard for local populations, ethnic groups, or tribal boundaries. The results? Well, we're still living with them.
Oh, yeah.
The foundations of modern Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and parts of Iraq were laid in the aftermath of this campaign. The decisions made in boardrooms and backroom negotiations following Allenby's victories have echoed through history. From the establishment of the British Mandate of Palestine to the Arab-Israel conflict and beyond. That's why this campaign, often overshadowed by the Western Front, deserves our full attention. It was a campaign of extremes, brutal desert conditions, bold cavalry charges, and complex diplomacy. It brought together colonial troops from India, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, France, and Egypt. It relied not just on bullets and bayonets, but on engineers, mechanics, railway builders, and yes, sailors. Men who never fired a shot in anger, but kept the front fed, clothed, armed, and moving. The Sinai and Palestine campaign is proof that logistics win wars, that sea power shapes land power, and that the lines drawn by empires can ripple across centuries. So as we close out today's episode, I encourage you to look again at your map of the Great War. Not just at France and Belgium, but at the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the dusty roads from Gaza to Damascus. And remember, without ships, there would have been no pipelines. Without ports, no railways. Without sailors, no victory.
That's very well said. I think it's amazing what shapes the entire conflict. I think today you think air power a lot of times can dominate a battlefield, but sea power still is very, very effective. And just the logistics to get materials from one place to another, food, evacuating wounded, everything you said previously, that's so crucial to make sure that your front is as formidable as you can make it. And this isn't something that, like I said, this is not a part of the conflict that I'm as familiar with or didn't really realize the importance of until this episode. So thank you.
All right, so we're going to close our episode with help of HeroCards.us by honoring one of our fallen angels. And today we're going to honor Corporal Wilfred Willie Flores Jr. His hometown was Lawton, Oklahoma. Served with the U.S. Army 2nd Battalion, 4th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division. He received the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. His date of sacrifice was March 31st, 2007, killed in action in Baghdad, Iraq. He was 20 years old. Even as a child, Corporal Wilfred Willie Flores Jr. wanted to be a soldier. Both his parents were retired Army Sergeants First Class. At Eisenhower High School in Lawton, Oklahoma, Flores joined the Junior ROTC program. Eager to make a difference in the world and to continue the family tradition of military service, Flores joined the Army in 2004, immediately after graduating high school. He was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 14th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division out of Fort Drum, New York. While he loved being in the military, Flores was disappointed with his first assignment to an airport tower to do paperwork. He eagerly volunteered as soon as there was an opening in the infantry, knowing that his reassignment could mean deployment to Iraq. He began his first Iraqi tour in 2004, with his second tour in February of 2007. According to U.S. Department of Defense officials, Corporal Flores was on patrol in Baghdad, Iraq, when his Humvee was hit by a roadside improvised explosive device. Just 20 years old, Corporal Flores died from his wounds. Also killed in the explosion was Staff Sergeant John R. Arnett. While Flores told his family that he was not a big fan of being in Iraq, he made sure they understood that he loved his job and loved being in the military. According to his parents, Corporal Wilfred Flores was very religious, very generous, and believed that God had a hand in everything. He died doing what he loved most. Willie's passion for service was not limited to the military. He was a dedicated volunteer for children's organizations, including Giddy Up and Go, a nonprofit organization that provides horse riding programs for disabled children and adults. In his honor, the Willie Flores Jr. Scholarship has been established at Cameron University in his hometown of Lawton, Oklahoma. At Lawton's Fort Sill Army Base, the Corporal Wilfred Flores Jr. Computer Lab was dedicated on April 10, 2013, which would have been the Corporal's 27th birthday. So, Corporal Wilfred Willie Flores Jr., we thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Get us out of here.
All right. Well, thank you, Dale. Thank you, listener. I hope you learned something like I did today. It's always nice to hear stories that maybe we've heard before or have a different take on. I just feel like I have a better understanding of World War I after listening to what we heard today. If you want to reach out to us, there's a couple different ways to do that. You can email us at usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We also have a Discord server. You can find that in the show notes, and you can join and talk about this episode or other episodes, or you can ask us questions or whatever you like. We're also on x.com or twitter.com, X-Twitter. I'm just going to say X-Twitter from now on. Everybody knows.
X-Twitter's fine. Yep.
We're on X-Twitter. The handle is at USNHistoryPod. And again, reach out to us. Let us know if we got something wrong or if you have more information about something we talked about. It's always nice to share in community. As always, thank you. If you want to tell a friend, a family member, coworker, or rate and review us on your favorite podcast app, that helps us get out there and share these stories with more people so more people can be informed about the importance of maritime support in conflict or any number of things. So I can't thank you enough for listening, and hope to see you next time, or hope to join you next time. I always say see. I hope to join you next time.
It's ingrained. It
is. Yeah, I think they know what I mean.
With that, guys, we're going to wish you fair winds on following seas. Goodbye.
Bye.